So hello and welcome everyone to this webinar about the general principles for coding of medication errors and other types of deviations from the labeled medicinal product use. I'm Caroline Wilson and work as a medical officer at the MSSO, and I will be your instructor today. And I'm supported by my colleague Jane Knight, who was speaking to you before. So together we will take you through this webinar, which will last for about 2 hours. We would like to make this webinar interactive. Jane mentioned this already. So please submit your questions or send us your comments through the question panel that you can find in the control panel on the right hand of your screen. And I will allow as much time as possible for questions, both during the course and at the end of the presentation. But just to let you know, please do not raise specific coding questions, as we cannot help you with individual verbatim terms. We will rather guide you in terms of coding principles. Now let's start with the presentation. You all know that ICH adopted the development of MedDRA mid of the 1990s in the last century and became the owner of the terminology afterwards. ICH then, on contract, appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, to provide and organize corresponding training as the one that we have today, and to administer the MedDRA licenses. And all these MSSO activities are overseen by the ICH MedDRA Management Committee. ICH is not only the owner of MedDRA itself, but also owns this training material. It is protected worldwide. You may use the slides with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, but will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. Also, any adaptations of the slides have to be clearly labeled. The second bullet point refers to warranty and liability issues you should be aware of. And the third one here is not relevant for today because we will not be using any third-party slides. Now let me provide you with an overview on what we will cover in this webinar. At first, we will explore the regulatory background for today's topic. We will then discuss definitions and terminologies for product use concepts based on the ICH guidance documents. After that, we will look into the general principles for coding of medication errors and then apply these principles in exercises using the MedDRA browser. And we will conclude with a question and answer session as mentioned at the beginning of the session. But we will address your questions throughout the session as well. This slide now explains about the quiz questions, the polling that we will use during the webinar. The easiest way to join is to scan this QR code with your smartphone, and it will bring you directly to the poll. And as soon as I activate the first question, you'll be able to see it and respond. Or alternatively, you may enter the indicated web address pollf.com into the URL bar at the top of your internet browser in your computer, tablet, or cell phone. And it will then take you to a log on screen and you'll be asked for a username. The poll is completely anonymous, so you don't need to enter your name, but please enter my credentials as the username, and that is Carol N. Wills 584 with no spaces, and then click join. I just leave this on the screen for a moment so that you can enter the required information, but you will see these credentials on each slide that relates to the quizzes. And Jane already mentioned it. This information is also in the, available in the chat. And should you lose connection to the poll during the session, please just let us know, and I can also show the QR code again in between. So now let's check whether it works. Yes, it does. So I see many people in Europe, Italy, buongiorno, buenos dias to Spain, India is there. What is it, Vietnam? I see somebody in China. Russia. Somebody in Canada? No, disappeared. Is it Indonesia? So many people in India, Europe, hard to distinguish the countries there with all the little flags. So it's nice to meet you all here for this webinar. And now Brazil is there. I don't know the Portuguese name for Buenos dias. Here we are. And now let's start with our webinar today. This is our topic. It is medication errors and other product use issues. And we will first look into the regulatory background because this is an important topic that is in focus of many regulatory authorities around the world. Medication errors are a critical and important problem in healthcare. And they are not only of great importance for the patients concerned, of course, but also have a huge impact on healthcare costs. They represent the most frequent preventable reason for adverse events in the use of medicinal products. And since they are actually preventable, they are in the focus of regulatory authorities. Depending on countries and regions, they support the recording, coding, reporting, and evaluation of these errors in order to gain new insights into the extent and also the causes of medication errors. Of course, with the intention to develop improved strategies for their prevention to better protect patient safety, but also to reduce healthcare costs, because the costs associated with medication errors could be much better used in other areas of the healthcare system. The fact that medication errors are in the focus of regulatory authorities is also reflected by new guidances that have been published or are in preparation. You may already be familiar with the Good Practice Guide on recording, coding, reporting, and assessing medication errors of the European Medicines Agency. This is just one example. And also the FDA has published various guidance documents to help avoid medication errors. And you can see some of them here, like guidances that refer to proprietary names, then a guidance here for safety consideration for product design to minimize medication errors, safety considerations for container labels and carton labeling designed to minimize medication errors, etc., etc. As stated earlier, regulatory requirements may differ between regions, so make yourself familiar with your local requirements. These are just examples. The regulatory initiatives mentioned have also led to the addition of new terms to MedDRA, together with a restructuring of the hierarchy to better support specific coding, but also subsequent data retrieval and assessment of medication errors and other types of product use issues. And they also led to updates and amendments of the relevant points to consider documents, the ICH guidance documents, to provide more guidance for these coding scenarios. You may now think that this topic is only relevant to the post-marketing sector, but this is not the case. It is also relevant for clinical development, clinical studies. Just as an example, some time ago, the FDA and the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA convened a virtual public meeting on the potential medication error risks with investigational drug container labels. And the risk of medication errors related to the content and format of information on investigational drug container labels was explored, the prevalence and nature of medication errors, and practices that might minimize the potential for such errors. And the recorded event is still available on the web if you are interested in it. So it's not, the topic medication error is not only relevant for the post-marketing area. Any questions so far, Jane? Did we get any questions?
No questions so far, Caroline.
Thank you. So as mentioned already, the PTC documents, points to consider documents, have also been updated and supplemented to provide more guidance and assistance to MedDRA users on this topic. Let us first look at the MedDRA term selection points to consider document. Here's the cover page of the latest version of the document. And if you look into the table of contents, you will see that the guidance for medication errors and other product use issues like misuse, abuse, addiction, plus off-label use here is quite short. This is different with the MedDRA points to consider companion document that provides more detailed information, examples, and guidance on medication errors and the other types of product use concepts. It is a living document that is updated as needed. If not, it is not newly released on the 1st of March each year, like the PTC document for MedDRA term selection. So the latest release of this document is from October 2020, as shown on the slide here. Here you'll find much more detailed explanations and instructions. And I can only recommend taking a close look at these 25 pages here. They are really very helpful to better understand the terminology and the classification of such events with many really practical examples. Now let me shortly show you where to find these documents. Here we are. Here is the MedDRA homepage. And here, if you click on how to use, you see support documentation. If you click on support documentation, takes a moment, you will find certain documents in different languages. Let's look at the English versions here. So here we have the points to consider documents and MedDRA best practices document. And here you have the MedDRA term selection points to consider document and the companion document, the 2.0 release that I've just shown you in the screenshot. And you find them in different formats, here in PDF, in HTML, and Word format, and you can download these documents from here. Let's get back to our presentation. So before we go into further details, we will have to familiarize ourselves with the terms that refer to medication errors and other product use errors and issues. Here, a definition of the term medication error. A medication error is any preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or harm to the patient while the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication process, meaning physicians, pharmacists, nurses, patients, consumers, or their families. The second aspect that is highlighted in green is important to remember. These errors occur during product use in the medication process, when the product is under the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. The term does not refer to errors that occur during manufacturing or are caused by wholesalers, in other words, outside of the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. Medication and other product use errors may be related to professional practice, the products themselves, and healthcare processes and systems, including prescribing, communication of orders, product labeling, product packaging and nomenclature, preparation of products and their dispensing, distribution and administration, as well as related education and product monitoring. Here, the source of this definition. And the PTC document for MedDRA term selection contains a table on page 31 that facilitates a high-level classification of product use errors and problems. 3 criteria are used for this purpose. Was the deviation intentional, a conscious decision, or did it happen in error? Was it unintentional? And who has caused this event? Who triggered it? the patient or consumer, or the healthcare professional? And did it happen in the context of the therapeutic use of the product, yes or no? So misuse, abuse, addiction are always triggered by the patient consumer. They are always intentional. Only the misuse occurs in the framework of therapeutic use of medicinal products. Abuse, addiction, of course not. You see the little asterisks here. Definitions of misuse may not always include the concept of therapeutic use. Misuse may be similar to the concept of abuse in some regions, like for instance, German-speaking countries. So there are some regional differences in the definition of such terms. Medication error is of course never intentional, is accidental, can be caused by the patient consumer or a healthcare professional, and occurs in the context, in the framework of therapeutic use of medicinal products. And off-label use is always an intentional decision by the healthcare professional for therapeutic purposes. So this is a rough classification of these concepts. Now let me illustrate these scenarios with some practical examples. So here we have Lisa, and she has stress at work. In the first scenario, the doctor prescribes 1 tablet of a sleeping pill a night to help her sleep better. But since she is still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, she decides to take another tablet. This is a conscious decision on her part, a deviation from the prescribed treatment regimen for therapeutic purposes. In other words, an intentional misuse of the medication and intentional drug misuse. In the second scenario, a friend advises her to look for painkillers on the internet to calm down. She orders the medication and takes 1 tablet a day at first, but then continuously increases the dose to 4 tablets a day by now. Here we also have a conscious decision by Lisa to take these painkillers to calm down, so she deviates from the actual therapeutic indication and gradually takes too much of them. So this constitutes a product abuse, here a drug abuse. In the third scenario, Lisa does not tolerate the sleeping pill. She is dazed after waking up. So the doctor prescribes her a painkiller off-label instead. Here we have a conscious decision by the doctor for therapeutic purposes, and we also know that this is an off-label use for an unapproved indication. So an off-label use of the product, the medication. Please note that 3 criteria which are required for the high-level classification as off-label use are met. But for coding purposes, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under PT off-label use. Off-label use has to be explicitly mentioned in the verbatim and in the case in order to be able to code this information accordingly. You may ask why. Well, off-label use refers to the unapproved use of an approved drug in a specific country. And this information is not available for coders in most instances. Coders shouldn't make that decision unless off-label use is explicitly reported. Related guidance can be found in both the PTC document for MedDRA term selection and the PTC companion document. Now, finally, in the fourth scenario, Lisa suffers from forgetfulness due to the stress she is experiencing at her workplace. She also forgets that she has already taken her medication one day and takes it a second time. This is unintentional, accidental, but happens in the context of therapeutic use. So this scenario now represents a medication error. The following flowchart visualizes the decision-making process. Here are the three core questions: intentional or unintentional, caused by whom, and in the context of therapeutic use, yes or no. Let us assume that the unapproved product use took place intentionally. This may be decided by a healthcare professional or by a patient consumer. If this is a conscious decision by the healthcare professional and for therapeutic purposes, we classify these events as off-label use. These three criteria are required for the high-level classification as an off-label use. But remember, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under PT off-label use. Off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. If an intentional deviation from the product information originates from the patient or consumer and happens in the therapeutic setting, we classify this as an intentional product misuse. If the deviation does not occur within the therapeutic use of the product, the deviation is classified as drug abuse or drug addiction dependence. Now, if the unapproved product use is unintentional, accidental, this can also be caused by both the healthcare professional or patient consumer. If this occurs in the context of the therapeutic use of the relevant product, it is classified as a medication or product use error. So this would be the flow chart for decision making. You may now argue that in many cases, it is not clear whether such a deviation was intended or unintended. Here you can see an example for such a scenario. It is reported that the patient took an extra tablet before going to bed. If no further information is available, we do not know the background. Did the patient misunderstand the doctor's instructions or the package leaflet? This would then represent a medication error. Or did the doctor mistakenly give her the wrong schedule with a prescription? This would also represent a medication error, in this instance, a prescribing error. Or is the patient's discomfort getting worse at bedtime and so she decided to take one more tablet? This scenario would constitute an intentional drug misuse. Or did the doctor decide to use the drug off-label because he was convinced that the treatment would be more effective this way? Our case information here, the verbatim, does not allow for any of these classifications. So what can be done when getting similar reports for coding purposes and when no further information can be obtained via a query? Now, for coding such scenarios, MedDRA contains very vague, non-specific PTs. If it is not clear whether such an event happened by mistake or intentionally, a suitable LLT under the PT product use issue can be used, so a very general term. And if it is not clear whether an intentional deviation from proper product use happens for therapeutic reasons, a suitable LLT under the PT intentional product use issue can be selected. The flowchart shown before must therefore be expanded with these two neutral terms, more general terms shown before, and you can see the question marks here now. If it cannot be clarified whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient happens for therapeutic reasons or not, then an appropriate LLT under PT intentional product use issue should be assigned. And if it cannot be clarified whether an unapproved product use by an HCP or patient consumer occurred by mistake or intentionally, an appropriate LLT under PT product use issue should be assigned. So these two are quite vague terms, but you'll find other more specific terms in MedDRA for dose or schedule deviation, which are, so to speak, neutral because they do not contain the information accidental or intentional. they can be chosen in combination with other MedDRA terms for intentional misuse, off-label use, or medication errors, and allow us to capture the details of what actually happened when no suitable combination term can be found in MedDRA. In this screenshot from the MedDRA browser, you can see some of these neutral PTs. For instance, it's HLT product administration errors and issues we are looking at. And you see PTs like extra dose administered, inappropriate schedule of product information, incorrect dosage administered, incorrect dose administered, product administered to patient of inappropriate age, product administration interrupted, and product dose omission issue. So these are all neutral terms because they do not contain the information whether this occurred accidentally or intentionally. Any questions, Jane?
No, Carol Ann, we have no questions at all so far this morning.
Okay.
Oh, hold on.
So,
yes, as I said that, one just arrived. How do you distinguish between drug abuse and drug addiction? I.e., how would drug addiction be reflected in the verbatim?
I can show you in a minute the definition. So it's a clear definition available for the distinction between both concepts. Just one moment.
Perfect.
When I will be demonstrate. Yeah.
Thank you.
So in order to search and select for suitable MedDRA terms for verbatims that relate to unapproved product use, so deviation from the approved product information, the label, it is relevant to understand MedDRA structure and rules and the details of the PTC guidance documents. But it is also important to make yourself familiar with the MSO MedDRA browsing tools or your own in-house MedDRA browsers. And of course, the MedDRA hierarchy. And I will now use the web-based browser to show you where to find the relevant terms and make you familiar with their hierarchy. So here we are. I will switch screens again. Here we are. And here's the web-based browser. If I log in, I will be asked for my MedDRA ID and my password. And here we are. So this is how the user interface looks like. And here we have to look into the SOC injury first, injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. Here we are. And in this system organ class, you find the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues. You find the HLGT for off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues, and an HLGT for overdoses and underdoses, NEC. NEC stands for not elsewhere classified. And if I open the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues, you see that there are several HLTs underneath, grouping the PTs. And you see, first of all, the accidental exposures to product. But then we come to the medication errors and product use errors and issues. Here is again an NEC grouping, not elsewhere classified. And then you see the stages of the medication use process: administration, dispensing, monitoring, preparation, prescribing, selection, storage, transcribing, and communication. So these are the HLTs, and if I open one of them, like here, the product administration errors and issues, you see that MedDRA has quite a granularity in this area. And we will have a look into this more in detail when looking at our examples, the demonstrations that we will be addressing at the end of this webinar. Many, many very specific terms. So it's very useful to make yourself familiar with the hierarchy and what is of course, also relevant here. Let me close this. We didn't look at all the concepts. If you look into psychiatric, the psychiatric disorders, and here into psychiatric disorders, NEC, here you have the substance-related and addictive disorders. Here you find the abuse and the addiction terms. Alcohol abuse, here we have the drug dependence, drug abuse, and very specific terms underneath referring to specific medication groups. So you saw that MedDRA is very granular, and we had already the question, what is the difference between abuse and dependence? Here, the MedDRA concept descriptions may be very helpful for you. So if you click here at the top on the button MedDRA concept descriptions, you see they are grouped in alphabetical order. So these are not medical definitions like the ones you would find in a medical dictionary. It's just a description how these terms are used and classified in MedDRA itself. And the first one that we can look at is the abuse description. For the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA-coded data, abuse is the intentional, non-therapeutic use by a patient or consumer of a product, either over-the-counter or prescription drug, for a perceived reward or desired non-therapeutic effect, including but not limited to getting high. Abuse may occur with a single use, sporadic use, or persistent use of a product. So if I now click on the D and look at dependence, I don't find anything. I thought I would find it. It's not there. So drug dependence is different. When you abuse a product and you really get dependent on it, when you have really clinical signs and symptoms, when you do not take the respective drug, then we talk about dependence. It's also, you do it for a perceived reward, like you do in abuse, but dependence really means that you have, let me check, product dependence. Maybe we find it under product dependence. No, it's not there. So when you have the reward, but you have then the signs of the dependence of this drug by having withdrawal symptoms, severe withdrawal symptoms. That's the difference between abuse and dependence.
We had a comment, Carol Ann, maybe addiction. Yeah. Is addiction in the list? Could we have a look and see if addiction's in the list?
Oh yeah, there it is. So it's dependence and addiction are synonyms. Sorry for that. So here we have because I was already wondering why don't I find a dependent concept description here. Addiction is an overwhelming desire by a patient or consumer to take a drug for non-therapeutic purposes, together with the inability to control or stop its use despite harmful consequences. So addiction can occur because drug induces physical dependence and consequently a withdrawal syndrome, but this is not an essential feature. And addiction can occur because a desire to experience the drug psychological, behavioral, or physical effects. So here we are. They are both together, abuse and addiction. Thank you, Jane. I overlooked it.
Thank you, Eva.
So these are the concept descriptions. And let me now show you the one for medication error, for instance. You will also find here, this is exactly what we have seen previously in the presentation. Then we have also concept descriptions for the misuse terms, for off-label use, for overdose. Here, for the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA-coded data, overdose is more than this maximum recommended dose in quantity and or concentration. In other words, an excessive dose. And same, let us look for underdose. In addition, here it is. Underdose is the administration of less than the minimum recommended dose in quantity and or concentration, as specified in the label, of course. And if you look at dose and dosage, I've shown you these PTs before. And And you may have wondered what is the difference between the two. So dose is a quantity to be administered at one time, such as specified amount of medication, one time, one dose. Dosage is much broader. Dosage refers to the determination and regulation of the size, frequency, so the schedule, and number of doses, so the length of the treatment. Much broader. It's a combination term, so to say. So very useful concept description that you find here. If you're not fully familiar with these terms, always recommendable to look into the concept descriptions. Now let me switch back to my presentation. Here again, a reminder where to find them and a reminder of the hierarchy. So here the 3 HLGTs that you can find in the SOC injury and the one that you find in psychiatric disorders that groups the PTs for abuse and addiction dependence. What kind of terms can we find under HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and problems? So we can find PTs for certain types of errors, such as wrong drug or wrong patient or wrong route. They can be selected together with, for example, PT prescribing error if no combination term is available. Then we find terms that link an error to a stage in the medication use process, such as the prescribing stage, product prescribing error, for instance. In addition, there are terms for intercepted errors, prevented by third-party intervention so that they didn't reach the patient. So an error occurred in a previous stage of the medication use process, but it was intercepted, prevented from reaching the patient. MedDRA also contains 2 PTs that describe the possibility of an error or signal a circumstance that could potentially lead to a medical device use error or medication error. As well as vague PTs that I've already addressed, which can be used when it is unclear whether the reported incident was due to an error or happened intentionally, or when it is unclear whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient or consumer occurred in the context of therapeutic use. So next question for you. Here it is reported that a dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label. Which LLT would you select? Remember, we looked at the concept description before of underdose. Does this represent an underdose, or would we select a drug administration error or incorrect dosage administered? What would you do? I see you're still voting. Let's have a look what you're going for. There's a split of opinions, but most of you are voting for underdose. So let me close this poll. And this is perfectly correct. So this is exactly what is described in the concept description. Everything that is below the minimum recommended dose in the product label is to be considered an underdose. And we cannot say that it was an accidental underdose. This was not reported. It was just reported that somebody took a dose that was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label. Maybe it was intentional, maybe it was accidental, we don't know. Incorrect dosage administered, as mentioned before, dosage refers not only to a dose, but also to the schedule and the duration of treatment. It is a much broader term. And drug administration error would be much too vague for this term. First of all, we don't know whether it was an error or whether it was intentional. And that's why it's not and we would not capture the actual specific type of deviation that is described in the verbatim, that the dose was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label, meaning an underdose. Next one. Inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pills. What would you do with this one? Incorrect dose administered. We know it was taken. We know whether it was accidental or intentional, but was it an accidental dose increase, or was it an overdose or an accidental overdose? Which LLT would you select here? Okay, 50 participants have voted already, so let's have a look. Accidental overdose. Very good. So this is the majority is voting for accidental overdose. We know it was accidental, and excessive dose is exactly what is described in the concept description for the definition or the description for the classification of overdose. So accidental overdose would be the correct assignment here. Let me close the poll. Here we are. Incorrect dose administered would be much too vague. We know it was an excessive dose, meaning an overdose, and we know that it was accidental, and we should capture the fact that this incident happened accidentally. Overdose would not capture the accidental nature. Accidental dose increase, again, would capture the accidental nature, but dose increase would be too vague. You know, it was an excessive dose, and that's why accidental overdose would be the correct assignment here. Any questions, Jane?
No questions, Caroline.
So then I hope it was clear then. Now that we have made ourselves familiar with the classification of medication errors and other types of product use issues, now let's have a look at some general principles for coding of medication errors. First, a short reminder regarding the basic rules that need to be followed for coding with MedDRA. The quality of the reported information and the extraction of relevant information during data entry are a basic requirement for good and meaningful coding. If the information received in coding is vague or ambiguous, of poor quality, ask for clarification. Coding is done at the LLT level, and the LLT that most accurately, most specifically reflects the reported incidents and events should always be selected. Nothing should be interpreted, added, and no relevant information should be omitted. This is the basic rule, code as reported. And of course, only current LLTs should be used for coding. So I assume that you are all very familiar with these basic rules, so I will not get into these any further. For coding product use errors and problems, the following tips may be helpful. First and foremost, you should be familiar with the MedDRA concept descriptions and the PTC guidance documents so that you know where to find more detailed information, more guidance to achieve accurate and consistent coding. You should also have a good knowledge of the MedDRA structure and hierarchy, particularly in shock injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. And once you have found a potentially appropriate LLT and PT for the reported incident, check if the placement of the selected LLT PT accurately reflects the reported event. It is best to search the MedDRA hierarchy top-down when coding medication errors and other product use concepts, unless you are already very experienced in coding such incidents. And finally, if you can't find a specific term for medicines, vaccines, or medical devices, look out for a product term that would be suitable for your coding task. The companion document specifies some principles for coding medication and other product use errors. When to use the PT medication error at all, when to select more than one term, when to perform split coding, when to use the PT off-label use, how to capture potential and intercepted medication errors, how to capture both the specific type of error and the stage of the medication use system where this error occurred, when to capture the root cause for medication errors, and that we should not infer a medication error. And I will address these one by one. The first principle refers to the use of PT medication error. As coders, we should not use this term unless we have no further information reported in the case. If you have additional information, more specific information, then search the hierarchy under HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues, and select the most specific LLT that you can find. And if a specific error is reported, but no suitable term can be found, then please submit a change request to get a better term and assign the LLT that represents the best approximation to the reported incident as a placeholder. Here an example: if it is only reported that a patient inadvertently didn't use the medication as prescribed and no further information is available, then of course LLT medication error can be selected, which is grouped under the same PT medication error. We know it was accidental, and we know that somehow the medication was not used as prescribed by the patient, so this represents a medication error. Sometimes you will get a report of a chain of events where an initial error leads to additional subsequent errors or even adverse events in the patient. Then code the initial error as the priority, and all subsequent errors and adverse events have to be coded in addition as reported. But please do not use multiple LLTs to represent one singular incident that is reported with both a general and a specific description in the reported term, the verbatim. This is in line with the general rule for coding of combination terms that refer to a general medical disorder that is further specified. As an example, if an arrhythmia is reported that is specified as atrial fibrillation in the given verbatim, one would only code the atrial fibrillation. So if you would get a reported administration error that is further specified, and you can find a perfect combination term to capture the full information, there is no need to assign two codes: administration, drug administration error, and then a specific term for the specific administration error. So always code as specifically as possible. Again, an example for this principle: it is reported that a nurse miscalculated the dose and the patient received 40 milligram instead of 20 milligram of his medication. And the patient then experienced severe hypotension. It is a chain of events, and we would capture the initial error with the dose, with the LLT dose calculation error, same PT, plus the subsequent administration error with the LLT incorrect dose administered, again, same PT. And of course, also the resulting adverse event in the patient, the hypotension. It is a chain of events starting with the dose calculation error that leads to the administration of an incorrect dose and finally to an adverse reaction in the patient, a hypotension. Any questions for this example?
No questions for this. No questions for this example either, Carol-Ann.
Okay. The next principle now then refers to off-label use. Always consider the criteria and information required to select a term under the PT off-label use. Off-label use relates to situations where a healthcare professional intentionally prescribes, dispenses, or recommends a product for a medical purpose, and this recommendation or prescription is then not in accordance with the authorized product information. It has to be an HCP, it has to be intentional, and for a medical purpose in the context of therapeutic use. So these are the 3 criteria that must be met for the high-level classification. The highlighted sentence added in the latest version of the MedDRA term selection points to consider document is copied from the companion document, from the release 2.0. As a coder, off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. Coders should not take this decision when only the 3 criteria are met, because it needs more specific product knowledge and information about the country of origin of the reported case. You all know that local regulation and also the product information may differ between regulatory regions, and it's only the product experts that can really reliably classify something as off-label use based on the local label. So regulators are very clear on this, and you'll see that in all examples of off-label use in the points to consider documents, the off-label use is clearly named in the wording. Let us look at it as an example again. It is reported that a pediatrician decided to use COVID-19 vaccine off-label for his 10-year-old high-risk patient, although not yet approved for this age group. And as the HCP has caused the deviation, has decided to do so. It was a pediatrician. He did it intentionally and based on therapeutic considerations. He wanted to protect his 10-year-old patient from an infection. And we are told that he decided to use the COVID-19 vaccine off-label, meaning that the vaccine is approved for immunization against COVID-19 infection in the respective country, but not for this age group. And the most specific LLT for this scenario is LLT off-label use in unapproved age group under PT off-label use. Questions that relate to this example, Jane?
We've had a couple of questions about off-label use, Carol-Ann. Nothing specific to this. Oh, let's have a look. One, does this mean that off-label use must be mentioned specifically? We've had a couple of questions asking that, but I think you've covered that already. You might just want to repeat it because that's an area of interest for people.
Yeah, as I said, so the local label for the same product may differ between countries. And depending on your working environment, depending on your processes, often there is out of context coding takes place. So the coder himself or herself does not have access to the case narrative or any additional case information that is available in the databases. So they do not even know the country of origin of the case if they are coding for pharmacovigilance, nor do they have access to the actual label, local label. So they should not take the decision whether this is off-label use or not. So this needs to be done in case processing in pharmacovigilance or by product experts in pharmacovigilance, and should not be decided by the coders. We had the same question before in previous trainings. You may have a completely different process. You may be a very local company and with only a few products, so that even coders have a full oversight of the products and the label in the respective country. So if this is the case, you may, of course, allow coders to classify, but they need to be trained. They need to understand what they are doing there. And this needs to be somehow also documented so that you are ready for inspections. Because as mentioned, so regulators do not want to take coders this decision because it's really important to classify these concepts accurately. And usually coders do not have access to the relevant information. Further questions? Jane?
No, I think that's all at this point, Caroline.
Thank you. Next one, principle number 4 refers to potential medication errors. So such incidents should be captured, and MedDRA has 2 PTs for doing so, LLT and PT circumstance or information capable of leading to medication error, and LLT and PT circumstance or information capable of leading to device use error. In addition, MedDRA has terms that help capturing the contributing factors, like for instance, drug label lookalike. So why do some regulators want to receive this information, are actually very keen to receive such information? Well, in such scenarios, no medication error happened yet, but could, of course, occur in the near future based on the reported contributing factors like drug name confusion, etc. When understanding the background for these potential errors, regulators can take steps to prevent errors even before happening. So depending on your local requirements, do not omit such information, but capture all relevant information when receiving similar verbatims and code both the potential for an error by selecting one of these PTs here, and also code the contributing factor or factors. Here again an example for this principle. The pharmacist reported that the blurred print on the drug label could lead to the wrong dose being given. No medication error occurred yet, but the pharmacist saw a circumstance, the blurred print on the label, that could lead to errors in the future. Remember, we would code the potential error by selecting circumstance or information capable of leading to medication error, same PT, and we would also code the scenario, the root cause that could lead to a medication error, here the blurred print on the label, by selecting LLT product label text illegible under PT product label issue. Please note that we would not code the type of potential medication error in addition by assigning LLT wrong dose. That would convey that a medication error actually happened. And here only the potential for a medication error is reported together with the root cause. So it's fully sufficient to signal the potential error by selecting one of the PTs that are available in MedDRA for such scenarios and the contributing factors, the root causes. Next principle. Sometimes medication errors at an earlier stage of the medication use process are prevented from reaching the patient. So a medication error occurred during prescription, preparation of the medication, etc., but is detected and intercepted by an active intervention of another person. When such scenarios are reported, the selected term for the intercepted error should represent the stage where the error actually occurred, not where it was intercepted. Meaning that when it is reported that a pharmacist dispensed the wrong drug, but the nurse identified the error before giving it to the patient, we should select intercepted drug dispensing error under PT intercepted product dispensing error, capturing the stage where the error actually occurred. We would not code to LLT intercepted administration error because the nurse did nothing wrong. The error occurred at the dispensing stage, and this is what we should capture. Are there questions, Jane?
We had a question, I think, on one of the earlier ones. So hold on, Caroline. Slide 49, what should we code if it's not, oh, it's back to not specifically specified as off-label. We're having the same question again several times, Caroline, about the off-label not specifically mentioned.
Yeah, you can only investigate and query a colleague. If you're working in pharmacovigilance, then query whether this represents off-label use, yes or no, so that you get the information that is available in the either in the narrative, or you contact the product expert in order to get a reliable classification whether this can be considered as off-label use based on the country of origin of the case and the local label.
And then we've got an example going back to your miscalculation. With the miscalculation, should it be coded to accidental dose increase?
Let me
earlier exactly 2 ago. Miscalculation of that one.
Here we are. Incorrect dose administered. I understand the question. Good question. Here we don't know. You need more information in order to really decide whether this is a dose increase or incorrect dose administered. Is we do not know whether this is accidental or intentional. You would always code as specifically as possible. That's for sure. We don't know whether this then really represents an overdose. In order to classify this as overdose, you would need more information about the product, the drug, and you would need information again of the label. What is the dose range that is recommended in the label? Everything that is above or below would be classified as overdose or underdose. But if this information is not available, then you would just assign incorrect dose administered.
That's everything so far, Caroline. Thank you.
So then I have to go back to my... Here we are with the next principle. We already talked about the stages of the medication use system when looking into the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues, and the MedDRA hierarchy underneath. So this slide now shows the different stages, starting with the storage of the medication, prescribing stage, transcribing, preparation, dispensing stage, administration stage, and the monitoring stage. One of the principal MedDRA coding rules, code as specifically as possible, capturing the full information of what has been reported, also applies, of course, to coding of medication errors, meaning that if a specific error is reported that occurred at a specific stage of the medication use process, we should capture the full information, the type of error, and the stage where it occurred. You'll see that MedDRA contains many terms that capture both the type of error and the stage, like for instance, LLT wrong drug prescribed. Others only capture the type of error, like wrong drug, for instance. So if the stage where the error occurred is unknown, you can just select the LLTs for the type of error. And others capture the stage only, like drug prescribing error, for instance, or drug dispensing error. Again, if the error is not specified, you would just select an LLT to capture the stage where the error occurred. So always capture both the stage and the type of error where it is known. And if the stage is not known, capture the type of error only. And if the type of error is not known, use the terms for the stage only. When both the stage and the type of error are reported, you would look for a combination term in MedDRA and use a single LLT to capture the full information when possible. As shown in the first example, when it is reported that the pharmacy dispensed the wrong drug, the LLT wrong drug dispensed would capture the full information. There is no need to assign two codes like wrong drug and LLT drug dispensing error. But sometimes you may not find a suitable combination term. If it is reported that a doctor mistakenly prescribed the wrong strength, you would have to split to capture the reported information in full by assigning wrong strengths to capture the specifics of the medication error and LLT drug prescribing error to capture the stage. So here split coding would be necessary. We already shortly addressed the root causes when talking about potential medication errors. If a medication error is reported in conjunction with the actual cause of this error, then always select a term for the root cause plus the resulting error. Remember what we discussed earlier. Root causes are critical to understand why an error occurred and to identify interventions that can be undertaken to prevent the error. And that is why many regulators are very interested in obtaining such information about these root causes. The next example describes such a case. Here, a doctor wrote a prescription for 40 milligrams of drug X for angina every 6 hours. So 4 times daily, meaning 160 milligrams of drug X. But because of the illegibility of the prescription, the nurse then administered the same dose of drug Y, a calcium channel blocker used in the treatment of hypertension, for which the maximum daily dose is only 10 milligrams. So because of the error made, the patient received 160 milligrams of this calcium channel blocker per day, 4 times 40 milligrams. And a day after taking the first 4 overdoses of the calcium channel blocker, the patient then suffered a heart attack and died. So what needs to be captured here? At first, the underlying disease in medical history and as indication for use in pharmacovigilance, the angina pectoris. Then the root cause, the illegible written prescription. Also, of course, the resulting medication errors, the administration of the wrong drug, and the resulting accidental overdose. And last but not least, the adverse reaction in the patient, the heart attack. So remember, it is very important to capture the root cause if reported, depending on your local regulations, of course, like always. Any questions, Jane? Other questions?
Yes, there's a couple of questions, Caroline. In regards to the intercepted errors, I find the wording before it reaches the patient can cause some confusion, because even if the error did reach the patient, but the actual administration of the product has been prevented, we still have the, we still have the intercepted error.
Yeah, what is meant with reaching the patient means that it was not administered in this instance. These are terms that you receive in drug safety where you don't get exact wording, but this is what is meant in this verbatim. It doesn't reach the patient, meaning that the nurse identifies the error and prevents this error from reaching the patient, meaning it's not administered.
And then the other one is the specific scenarios. So we can't code specific scenarios.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So here, the last principle that we will discuss today: do not infer a medication error. Remember another basic rule for coding with MedDRA: code as reported. Do not add or subtract relevant medical information. The same rule also applies to the coding of medication errors, of course. If you receive a verbatim that describes a deviation from the label, an unauthorized use of the product, only select an LLT or LLTs that reflect what has been reported. Do not assume that a medication error or device use error occurred if this is not made clear in the verbatim. So if it is reported that a nurse administered 50 milligrams of drug X, do not assume that this is a medication error. Try to obtain more information from the reporter or find out the dose range. First of all, the product, the dose that was actually taken, Here we know it, but we need the information about the drug, and you need, of course, the information about the dose range that is defined in the prescribing information of the respective drug. Only then you can classify this as a medication error. So do not assume anything, do not interpret, try to clarify the background. And as a summary here, a nice visual presentation of the different types of medication error cases taken from the good practice guide of the EMA. In the first example, a medication error occurs, here it is, leading to an administration error, so it reaches the patient, and to harm in the patient. Next, an error happens and reaches the patient, but it does not result in any harm to the patient. The third type of report refers to an intercepted medication error, where an error occurs in the medication use process, but is prevented from reaching the patient or consumer, so it is not administered. And finally, a potential error is described, where it is reported that there is a risk for a medication error in the product use process due to special circumstances, a special root cause, like drug name confusion or drug packaging confusion or drug appearance confusion, for instance. So here, no error occurred yet, but there are circumstances that could lead to an error in the future. So last chance for questions for these principles.
No, this last one is, so if the doctor's ignorant of the information from the national authority and around, if the doctor's ignorant of the information they need, the drug's used incorrectly, exceeding the general duration of administration and the drug, and then the maximum daily dose, what about coding that one? So if it's above the maximum daily dose, Carol-Ann, and the doctor made an error because of ignorance, what's the principle there?
Well, if you have the information to really classify this as an overdose, so if you have information about the dose range and you know it's an excessive, exceeding the dose range that is defined in the prescribing information, then you can of course say it is an overdose. You can classify as overdose, and if you have the information in the in your verbatim, in the narrative, that this was made in error by the treating physician, then you would of course consider this an accidental overdose.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then if you would need to capture any additional information that is described or reported in the case when this occurred, whether this was a prescribing error, so that and that then reached the patient. So it really depends on additional information that is available in the case in order to really tell you what exactly to select for such a scenario. But if you have the information that it is above the defined dose range in the prescribing information, you know you can classify as overdose, and then you have to look for the fact whether this is accidental or intentional, or whether it is not specified at all, then you would just code overdose.
Thank you, Carol-Ann. It's a very thorough response. Then the earlier question just that I did address was that, just for clarify, that some of these concepts that you've been talking about, like drug misuse and drug abuse, can also be used in relation to clinical trials, can't they? If there's reports that the drugs are being used incorrectly.
Yes, of course. Yeah. If you have this information, yeah.
Thank you.
Should not happen because, it depends whether the patient are in a hospital setting or in an ambulance setting. If they are out of hospital, then of course, if they receive some amount of the medication, they may abuse it. Yes.
But yes. Thank you, Carol-Ann.
Mm-hmm.
That's everything.
Thank you, Jane. So now let's continue with our example. So If you are to code such scenarios, you will have to assess the reported information first before looking for suitable LLTs. You will first have to check for the 3 criteria that are needed for the classification, for the general classification. Did the incident occur accidentally or intentionally? Who has caused it? Was there a therapeutic purpose? Then you would check at which stage the error occurred and whether it led to subsequent errors and even harm in the patient. If contributing factors are reported, they need to be captured in addition. Or was the report referring to circumstances that could lead to a medication error? Or was the error intercepted before reaching the patient? Because depending on what you have in the case in your verbatim, the type of information, depending on the type of information that you get, this will influence the way you search for appropriate terms, of course. And the more information that you have, the more precise it is. This will help you to find the most suitable LLTs, the closest matches. Here's our first example. So now we are coming to the demonstrations where we will apply our principles that we have just discussed using our decision chart and looking into the MedDRA browser. Here it is reported that the nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. So what can we take from this report? Is it reported whether this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that the incident happened accidentally. The nurse forgot. Do we know who caused it? Click yes, of course, an HCP, a nurse. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Again, it was. And we also know the stage where the error occurred. But no root cause was provided. So we first look at our verbatim in order to fully understand what has been reported here. Now, how would you approach this report? Nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. Would you assign scheduled daily dosing, taken less frequently, drug dose omission in error, drug use for unapproved schedule, or would you consider to assign temporary interruption of therapy? What would you do? Nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. Let's have a look. Most of you are voting for drug dose omission in error. Some also consider a scheduled term or a vague term, drug dose omission, and also temporary interruption of therapy. So let me close this poll. Majority drug dose omission in error, but we have a split of opinions here. Let us first use our decision chart. We know that the incident occurred in error. And we know it was caused by the nurse, an HCP. And we know that it occurred in the framework of therapeutic use. So the incident has to be classified as medication error. Now let's have a look into the MedDRA browser to find the best term. Let me switch screens again. Here we are. So let's have a top-down search, not in psychiatric disorders, but in the injury SOC. And here we have the medication errors and other product use errors and issues. And it was an administration error that was reported. So we would look into this HLT, product administration errors and issues. And we have product dose omission in error, here it is, and product dose omission issue. So one very vague term that can be used if it's not clear whether the deviation from the label occurred in error, yes or no. So this, but we know that the nurse forgot, so it was an error product. Dose omission in error would be the correct PT here, and we would look for the most specific LLT that we could find, and it is drug dose omission in error. Because we know it was a drug, here drug dose omission in error would capture the full information. Inappropriate schedule of product. Some of you voted for a schedule term. Inappropriate schedule of product administration. LLTs underneath this PT would be selected when it is reported that dose omissions occur regularly. And if you look into this, like once daily dose taken less frequently. In our case, it was just one dose that was missed, so the schedule term would be inappropriate. Drug use for unapproved schedule is a very vague term. It does not contain any information whether it was administered. It does not contain information about accidental or intentional. So you will find it under this HLT here, under the very vague PT product use issue. Here it is, let me look for it, drug use for drug use population for unapproved schedule. Here it is. So very vague, but we have more information in our verbatim, so this LLT would not be suitable. And now let's look for therapy interruption. Using the search field here. And if I look for that and click on it, you see here the hierarchy, and you see the temporary interruption of therapy is grouped under PT therapy interrupted, and it's considered a therapeutic procedure. So surgical medical procedures, it is grouped under this system organ class. So this LLTs under this PT should only be used when a therapy was interrupted due to reasons that are out of the control of the HCP or patient consumer, like supply issues, insurance issues, financial issues, or product availability issues. So when a patient cannot afford the medication, for instance. Let me switch back. Here a reminder of what we just saw. So the correct code assignment would be drug dose omission in error. And here we are. We would assign drug dose omission in error under PT product dose omission in error. And most of you have voted for this LLT, so well done. Thank you for joining the poll. So any question?
The only question I think is on the previous example. There's a request to review slide 63, Carol Ann. If you've got no questions on this one so far, maybe people are just letting it sink in and the questions will appear shortly.
63.
This was the question. This was the request. Isabella asked us to see it again.
So here, we know that the nurse forgot to administer, so it's an accidental incident. We know it was a nurse, an HCP. In the context of therapeutic use, it was a chemotherapy, and the stage is the administration stage. She forgot to administer it.
Thank you, Carol Ann. If there's any questions, I'll let you know or follow up. But no other questions at the moment, so.
Okay, so then we can get back. Next example. Here it is reported that the patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. So what do we know here based on the information provided? Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that the incident happened accidentally. The patient did not read the instructions thoroughly enough. Do we know who caused it? Yes, the patient. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. And we also know the stage where the error occurred. The drug was administered. but no root cause was provided. We know that the patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly, but we don't know why, whether it was under stress, whether he was distracted, whatsoever. So how would you approach this one now? Would you assign drug use for unapproved indication, unintentional use for unapproved indication, product leaflet instructions confusion, off-label use in unapproved indication, and/or drug administration error? What would you do? So maybe split coding would be necessary here. Please consider whether this is necessary. Patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. So he took it. I do not see any votes so far. So make your choice, be brave. Let's see, I don't see any votes. Here they are. Unintentional use for unapproved indication is what the majority says. Drug administration error in addition. Drug use for unapproved indication, a more vague term, and some of you are also considering the off-label use term or product leaflet instructions confusion. So let me close the poll here. Majority is voting for unintentional use for unapproved indication and the drug administration error. So split coding, but we have other proposals as well. So let's use our decision chart again to classify the incident first. We know that the incident happened accidentally. We know that it was caused by the patient, and we know that it was in the context of therapeutic use, and meaning that this verbatim describes the medication error again. So now let me search again for the terms that were proposed, and here I will use the search field again and look for indication and administration using the word stems. Here we are, contraindicated drug administered. So this is not what has been reported here. We don't know whether this was contraindicated, this drug. So no suitable term is available. Let's adapt our search and look for a more vague term, entering use, and search again. And here we have drug use for unapproved indication. We have the intentional use for unlabeled indication, and we have the unintentional use for unapproved indication. So here we know it was accidental. Yeah, the patient just didn't read the instructions thoroughly enough, and that's why he did something wrong. Here we are, same, the PT is unintentional use for unapproved indication. But assigning this LLT here, unintentional use for unapproved indication, with this LLT, we do not capture the fact that the drug was actually finally administered. It would be necessary to split code to capture the full information and to select drug administration error in addition. With this LLT, we capture the accidental nature of the incident, and that is why both the LLT's unintentional use for unapproved indication and drug use for unapproved indication can be used to capture the details of the administration error, that the drug was taken for the wrong indication. We need to split code, we need to assign a drug administration error in addition, and that's why both unintentional use for unapproved indication and drug use for unapproved indication would be suitable for this case, because the accidental nature is already captured by the administration error term. So off-label use in unapproved indication would be incorrect because the verbatim does not describe an off-label use. And now we come to the product leaflet instructions confusion. So again, when doing a top-down search here, HLDT medication errors and other product use errors and issues, here we have the product confusion errors and issues. Here we have also the product label confusion, drug label lookalike, drug label confusion, expiration date format confusion, patient's instructions for use in label confusing. So this was not reported. Nothing was wrong with the label, but the patient, him or herself, the patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly enough. So nothing, it was not reported that something was wrong with the label. Now, here again, the terms in the hierarchy, screenshots from the MedDRA browser again. So both drug use for unapproved indication and unintentional use for unapproved indication would be suitable. In addition, we would need to code the drug administration error in order to make clear that the drug was finally administered. Product leaflet instructions confusion would not be appropriate, as explained earlier. And off-label use in unapproved indication would not be correct as well, because this was caused by the patient and was accidental, so nothing that would be suitable for classification as off-label use. And my final suggestion is to select drug administration error and under the same PT, and unintentional use for unapproved indication under PT, unintentional use for unapproved indication. Drug use for unapproved indication, this LLT does not capture the full information, and therefore split coding is required for this scenario. The PTC companion document clearly states that coding a singular error by selecting two error terms is useful when this provides meaningful additional information. In other words, when the single LLT cannot describe the entire reported scenario. Alternatively, one could also assign drug use for unapproved indications, so skipping the unintentional aspect, with the argument that the accidental nature is already captured by the first code assignment, because this contains the information that it was accidental. But personally, I prefer the assignment of the LLT shown on the slide because it is the most specific term. It captures the fact that the drug use for unapproved indication happened accidentally, and we should always try to code as specifically as possible. Any related questions, Jane?
Does the word use not mean that the drug was administered? I would say
no.
Double. So just
no. Use just means it is somewhere used in the drug use process. It could be prescribing stage, it could be preparation stage, it could be anywhere.
That's the only question, Caroline. That one's just arrived. No other questions.
Next example. A patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. Now let's again look at the verbatim and answer the relevant questions. Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that the patient consciously decided to take more than the recommended dose to get a better drug effect. Do we know who caused it? Yes, it was a decision of the patient. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred. We know it was administered, but no root cause was provided. Your turn again. Which LLT would you select for this verbatim? Patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. Unapproved dose administered, intentional overdose, wrong dose administered, intentional misuse by dose change, or incorrect dosage administered? What would you do? I see you voting. And see that more than 50 of you have already voted. So let's look what you're going for. Intentional misuse by dose change and the intentional overdose seems to be the preferred assignments. Others also vote for unapproved dose administered, wrong dose administered, incorrect dosage administered. So we have a split of opinions here. Let me close the poll. Intentional overdose or intentional misuse by dose change. Let's first look at our decision chart again. Here we have a different scenario. We know that it was intentional. We know that it was caused by the patient, and we know that it was for therapeutic purpose, So meaning that this verbatim describes an intentional drug misuse. Here we are. And if I again switch and look into the browser, we know it was a conscious decision, an intentional deviation from the prescription for therapeutic reason. And let's check now for the terms in the browser. So this is not a medication error. It was a conscious decision. It is not a use issue, because we know it was a conscious decision, an intentional deviation by the patient for therapeutic purposes. And remember the concept description. So this represents a misuse. And here we have the off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues in this HLGT. So this is the one that is relevant for our verbatim. And the first HLT represents the intentional product misuses. It's not a device, it's not a drug delivery system, it's a product misuse. And now let's look for the LLTs that are available under this PT. And here we have the intentional misuse by dose change. This is the best approximation to what has been reported in our case. It's not dosing frequency, not use duration, it's the dose change. The other option was intentional overdose. You will find here the HLGT overdoses, underdoses here. Overdoses NEC, here is the intentional overdose. Do we know whether this was an overdose? We just know patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. He could have taken more than the prescribed dose, but this doesn't mean that he already exceeded the defined dose range in the product label. So we don't have this information, whether this really truly represents an overdose, yes or no. So assignment of overdose terms would not be appropriate in this instance. And all the other options that were offered in the quiz were incorrect. Unapproved dose administered, incorrect dose administered, and incorrect dosage administered do not represent intentional drug misuse, but drug administration errors or use issues. So this would be the correct assignment here. And getting back to my slides, here again the screenshots of the terms that we were looking at. Unapproved dose administered is grouped under product use issue, much too vague, incorrect classification, incorrect dosage administered, again, does not represent a misuse, drug misuse, intentional drug misuse, and also dosage, remember, refers to not only the dose, but also to the schedule and duration of therapy. Wrong dose administered is again much too vague. And here we have the correct assignment, intentional misuse by dose change, and intentional overdose, as mentioned before, explained before, would not be appropriate because we do not have the information for classification as overdose. Here we are. The final suggestion is to code to intentional misuse by dose change under PT intentional product misuse. Questions, Jane?
No questions, Caroline.
Okay, I think this was quite clear. Now, our next exercise. Here, a doctor prescribed drug A off-label to suppress preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. Now, what does this verbatim tell us? What do we know? Do we know whether this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that this was a conscious decision by the HCP. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. All criteria for classification of this incidence as off-label use are met. And it is also reported that the doctor used the drug off-label. We also know the stage where the incident occurred. At the stage of prescribing. The drug was prescribed off-label for a patient suffering preterm labor, but no root cause was provided again. Which LLT would you select when looking at this reported incident? Doctor prescribed drug A off-label for suppression of preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. Let's look what you're going for again. Most of you are voting for off-label use and unapproved indication. Others for drug use for unapproved indication, intentional use for unlabeled indication. Drug prescribed for unapproved indication. So let me close the poll and again use our decision chart. We know that this was a conscious decision. It was made after careful risk-benefit assessment. We also know that this decision was made by an HCP, here the doctor. And we know that it was made for a therapeutic purpose. So this incident can be classified as off-label use based on our 3 criteria, and because we also are provided with the information that the doctor prescribed the drug off-label. We can, of course, then select a suitable term under PT off-label use. This is what we will be looking for now. If I go to the browser again, here we have the intentional product misuses, but here we also, under the same HLGT, we also find the HLT for off-label uses. Off-label use, here we are, and we have off-label dosing, dosing amount, dosing frequency, age group, but here is a very specific term for our coding scenario, off-label use in unapproved indication. So here with this LLT, we capture everything that was reported, we would not, there is no need to split here because we would cover all the details of the off-label use by assignment of this LLT. Here again, the options that we had, drug use for unapproved indication is use is under medication errors, product use errors, and issues NEC, a very vague term under PT product use in unapproved indication. We have the drug prescribing error, drug prescribed for unapproved indication, of course not suitable because no error was made, it was a conscious decision by the physician. Drug prescribed for unapproved indication, again, a vague term under product prescribing issue, would not capture the intentional conscious nature of this incident, and also would not capture that it was for therapeutic purposes and off-label. And intentional use for unlabeled indication could also refer to a patient. So off-label use and unapproved indication is the correct term here. captures the fact that it was a conscious decision by the physician, the fact that it was the drug was prescribed for an unapproved indication, and also it was that it was done off-label. So we had the information off-label in the verbatim. So we have the information that this indication is not covered by the local label. So we would code to off-label use and unapproved indication under PT off-label use. And of course, preterm labor would also be coded in the case of this patient in the narrative. Any questions, Jane?
We have a question relating to clinical trials coding, not related to this example, Caroline. So if you just let me know when you'd like it.
Yeah, just raise it.
If the patient is in a clinical trial and they intentionally take a higher oral drug dose than indicated in the protocol, would this be an intentional overdose or misuse?
The misuse depends on whether this was an error, whether the patient made an error and took more than the indicated dose, or whether it was a conscious decision for therapeutic reasons, for whatever.
So the question says it was intentional, Caroline.
It was intentional. Yeah, then we would need to know whether it was because the patient thought that the drug would then work better, then it wouldn't be an intentional misuse. Correct. Classification overdose in clinical trials, you have to take a decision there. In my previous life in pharma, we had a definition what is to be considered an overdose in clinical studies. Usually you would say it depends on the product, but there's a clear dose range usually in clinical studies. So you may have different dose groups, but everything that exceeds these doses we defined as an overdose, because there's a clear, it's a clinical study, there's a clear dose range that is defined. So everything that is below or above this dose range need to be considered an underdose or overdose, in my view. Yeah,
that's the only question. Thank you.
Yeah. This is the last example for today. It is reported that a doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. So what can we take from this? We know whether this was accidental or intentional. Of course, we know it was accidental. The doctor mixed up the drug names. Do we know who caused it? Who made this decision? Yes, the doctor. And was it in the context of the therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred. It was at the prescribing stage. And was there a root cause that has to be captured? Yes, here a root cause for this error was reported. Now, how would you approach this verbatim? Doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. Wrong drug administered, wrong drug prescribed, wrong drug, product confusion, drug name look-alike, drug prescription issue. What would you do here? So you see that more than 80 votes were already given. So here we are. Wrong drug prescribed, drug name look-alike. These seems to be the favorite solutions, but we also have some of you also voting for wrong drug or product confusion or drug prescription issue. Let me close the poll. So this seems to be the preferred approach here, wrong drug prescribed, drug name look-alike. Now let's look at our decision chart again. We know that this occurred unintentionally, accidentally. because the doctor mixed up the drug names. We also know that it was caused by the doctor, by the HCP, and we know that this happened in the framework of therapeutic use, meaning that this incident represents a medication error again. And when I look for the relevant terms in the browser again, and if I search for wrong drug, here and search, then I find, of course, the wrong drug, but we have a stage information here. So we would like to also capture the stage where this error occurred, that a wrong drug was either administered, prescribed, whatsoever. Wrong drug dispensed, here we have the wrong drug prescribed. This is exactly what happened in our case. The doctor prescribed the wrong medication, wrong drug prescribed. Here we are, here we have the hierarchy under product prescribing error. Under HLT, product prescribing errors and issues. So now what about the root cause? There was a confusion with the product and it was further specified. The drug names looked similar and that is why the doctor prescribed the wrong drug. Now let's do a top-down search again in the injury SOC, medication errors and other product use errors and issues, product confusion errors and issues. And here we have the product name confusion. Let's look for the LRTs that are available under this PT. And here we have the drug name lookalike, perfectly capturing what has been reported here in our verbatim, because it was reported that the drug names look similar. So drug name lookalike would be the correct term to capture the root cause for the error made by the HCP. Switching back to my slides. And here you again have the terms that were provided in the poll. Wrong drug is very vague. We know it was accidental. We know it was at the prescribing stage. So this wrong drug would be much too vague. Wrong drug administered would be incorrect because we don't know whether this drug was finally administered. We only know that the doctor prescribed the wrong medication due to the drug name confusion. Product confusion, yes, there was a product confusion, but we have a much better term here, drug name lookalike, so product confusion would be too vague. And wrong drug prescribed would be the correct LLT here. It represents an error and perfectly captures the specifics of the error made. Drug prescription issue would be again too vague, would not capture the accidental nature of the incident. So here we are, we would select wrong drug prescribed to capture the specifics of the prescribing error under PT product prescribing error, and we would also assign drug name lookalike to capture the root cause under PT product name confusion. Any questions, Jane?
No questions, Caroline.
Okay, so this is a summary of what we have covered today. So we discussed the regulatory background for our topic. I've introduced the ICH guidance documents that really help you to classify similar concepts. We discussed the definitions for product use concepts, and we also discussed the related MedDRA concept descriptions, and we discussed the general principles for coding of medication errors and looked into related coding demonstrations. So if you are responsible for coding medication error reports, please make sure to code the reported incident as specifically as possible. Make yourself familiar with the granularity of MedDRA in this area, refer to the concept descriptions and the PTC guidance documents, and try to capture all the reported details. Only then regulators and also pharma companies will have the chance to run useful analysis in their databases to get new insights into the extent and also the causes of medication errors, and with the ultimate goal to improve and develop strategies for the prevention of these medication errors. So this is your last chance for questions.
No, nothing so far. Nothing so far. No.
Okay, then some helpful information for you. So about the website is always a good source for additional information. Also our help desk, the colleagues at the help desk will take your questions, and you can be sure to get a quick and useful response from the colleagues there. Also, you find a FAQ section on the website, and here again the links to the MedDRA browsers that are provided by the MSSO. Additional links to the change request submission tool if you see that you have a verbatim that describes a medication error or issue that is not yet covered in MedDRA, then please submit a change request. Then the link to the training schedule and the MedDRA support documentation, where you can find the PTC documents I've shown you on the website. This is what you will find under the header training schedule on the MedDRA website for upcoming medication error webinar. So this is the one that we have today. And on the 24th of October, I will provide the last webinar that is related to medication errors in this year. So if you have colleagues who may be interested, just let them know so that they can join this webinar. You cannot only contact the MSSO via the help desk, but also via other communication channels, as you can see when clicking on the button Contact on the MedDRA website. And you'll find us in Facebook, in LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And you can also join English, Spanish, French, Russian, and Chinese WhatsApp and WeChat groups. And we also offer an online contact form from where you can directly type in your questions and submit them. And last but not least, you can also have an instant discussion with our colleagues from the help desk through a live chat that you can call up from the website. So here's the live chat, and here's the contact form. And the YouTube channel may be of special interest for you, because there you find recorded sessions of our training events sorted by trainers. And this is what I would like to show you. Here we are. So here we have the MedDRA website. If I click on contact, here you saw the screenshot before. And if I click on the YouTube icon, then you have all the trainers here and the respective topics that and the recorded webinars for the specific topics. You see that we also have some recorded sessions of medication error workshops. So if you would like to see more examples for coding of medication errors and other product use concepts, then you can refer to this. Oh, here we are. So here you have the 4 workshops. So you can access them and just watch the full session. Of course, you cannot raise questions there, but it may nevertheless be interesting for you. And if you're not yet too familiar with MedDRA coding, you can, of course, choose MedDRA coding webinars of the different trainers. Here, for instance, our colleague Samina in the US, and we also provide trainings also for the medication error topic in Spanish, in Russian, in Chinese, in French, and in Korean. So this is what I wanted to show you so that you can make use of it. And with this, I would like to say thank you for joining for today, and hope that you found this webinar helpful, useful for your work. And I also hope to meet you again in one of our coming MSSO webinars, or also at a face-to-face training. So thank you for joining today again. And again, a big thank you to you, Jane, for your support today, handling the questions. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and a warm goodbye to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Caroline.
Bye, Jane.